Did you know you could be leaving money on the table every single month at your short-term rental and not even know it? Did you know that there are certain rule sets and pricing strategies that will instantly make you more money every single month with just a few tweaks every single week? We have pricing and short-term rental expert Michael McClearn on the show today to talk about his major strategies for making more money and why he had to live with his grandma the first year of his journey. Let's talk about it on today's episode of BiggerStays. What's up, everybody? Garrett Brown back again at BiggerStays, here for another amazing episode. We have Michael McClearn, a short-term rental expert in the Colorado area. Michael, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Garrett. Yeah, like you mentioned, so I'm a licensed real estate agent here in the state of Colorado. We work with clients all over the state here. I'm an investor myself, and I started a company called Stay Rate, where we focus on making hosts more money on their existing properties by just pricing them better.
That's a great strategy to have, and one that a lot of hosts have been failing on. So we will get into that. So it makes us keep staying tuned, because Michael has some amazing pricing strategies that we will tackle. But I know that a lot of people watching this are possibly even just now getting started, or maybe have had, the itch to get started in short-term rentals. What brought you to short-term rentals, and why did it draw you in so much?
Really, I got looped into the whole realm of real estate through BiggerPockets in the first place. It was a podcast episode with Craig Curlop, the FI guy, all about financial independence and freedom. And that really spoke to me from a young age, kind of in high school. And so it was like an actionable strategy that was discussed in the podcast, this idea of house hacking, buying a place as a primary residence, 3.5% down for your first investment home or your first home, renting out the bedrooms and things like that. And I was making good money. I bought my first place back in 2020. 5-bedroom home, lived in one, rented out the others for about $900 a pop. I'd been doing this for about 4 or 5 months, and I had a conversation with one of the other agents on my team, and she dropped the idea of Airbnb. She told me that she was living in her upstairs unit and renting out the basement. And in some peak months, she was making like $6,000. It was just kind of like that light bulb aha moment, where it was like, oh, wait, you're living in the comfort of your own home in an upstairs unit. It's kind of, unofficially duplexed out, and you're renting out the basement separately, and you're making more money. And so for me, it was a culmination of the cash flow just looked a lot better. There was a lot more comfort and privacy in doing that if you were going down the house hack route. A part of it too is just, I really like hospitality. I've stayed in a bunch of Airbnbs, in my life. I grew up overseas in Southeast Asia, and, we'd go to hotels up in the beaches and the mountains all the time. And so receiving that good hospitality in different, places that I'd visit was always something that was really special. Short-term rentals as a conduit to kind of give back to people, to help curate and provide unique experiences for people visiting the Denver area, was fun for me. And, it was a lot more creative. Right. The numbers were great. They were a lot better, but it was also this idea of like being able to provide and curate a space where people could come together and really just have a good time. So multifaceted answer, but it really just checked a lot of the boxes for me.
I resonate a lot with that too, because I love the creative side of short-term rentals. I did music for a long time, and so when I got further into real estate, one of the reasons that short-term rentals drew me in, because it was one of the few that I thought that you really can be as creative as you possibly want to and still have a real estate investment. So that's all great advice and great point about the hospitality side too, because I think that's where a lot of people maybe get held up or don't perform as well of a host. Did you end up turning that house hack into a short-term rental from there? Did you find a new property to start that venture afterward? What were the next steps once you got your gears turning?
That particular property is in the Denver metro area, so Denver County. In Denver County, you can't legally rent out a home as a short-term rental if it's not your primary residence. So what I ended up doing with that one was I ended up duplexing it out. I put a basement kitchenette down there, rerouted some plumbing and piping for a washer and dryer. So it exists as 2 separate rental spaces right now. And my second home, which I bought in Aurora, Colorado, ended up becoming my first short-term rental property. And so that was kind of a similar story. I did it was a house hack as well. I bought it. I lived in it for about 8 months. I furnished it, renovated it. I also did a duplex thing there too, where I put in a kitchenette in the basement, added some egress windows, created 2 extra bedrooms. So now I bought it as a 3-2. Now it's a 5.2. So, owner occupied, 5% down, conventional loan, got a great, sub 3% rate back in 2021.
The golden days.
It was cool. It was kind of scrappy. For what it's worth, I kind of went down the YouTube University avenue. I knew a few people who were doing short-term rentals, not great friends, but like a few, on the side, periphery people. And so, I get advice and things here and there, but really I default to YouTube and Google and things like that. And it was scrappy, man. I was buying stuff off of Facebook Marketplace. I wasn't working with a designer, so I was kind of curating things myself. I was going into consignment shops, Amazon Home Goods, TJ Maxx, Hobby Lobby. I was experiencing the treasure hunt at Ross. It was fun. It was kind of nerve-wracking. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I made this decision internally to commit. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to figure it out as I go. Other people have done this that are less smart than I are, that are less resourced than I am. It was kind of intimidating because here I am. I bought this place. I was 24 at the time. So down payment, renovations, furnishings, all in, I spent probably around $76,000. And you spend all that money before you see a single dime come in the front door. So I always tell people, I'm not personally religious, but I tell people, investing in short-term rentals requires a little bit of faith. And, this is me back in the day when I wasn't familiar with AirDNA and doing market research and things like that. So it really was kind of like a shot in the dark. But, I launched like in the slow season and things just took off like wildfire. I think in that first year I launched, I made like $92,000 in gross revenue. The net on that was like $36,000, which was substantially more than I would have made house hacking, right? And the cool thing that I later on discovered too is like, just the litany of different tax saving, components that you can take into account when you're doing a short-term rental that you can't when you're just doing a regular long-term rental. I was kind of hooked after that. It was one of those things where I just felt like, I wanted to start preaching and telling people about this. I was like, guys, you gotta get into this thing. It's fun and it's, profitable.
So you gross revenue about 90 or so thousand, and you were living in, was this a side-by-side duplex or a bottom and top duplex that you set it up, or that how you set it up?
So this house specifically, it's 2,200 square foot home. I ended up duplexing it out as a top bottom. And again, I lived in the house and set it up over the course of 8 months. So I wasn't doing it professionally back then. Again, it was just a little bit more scrappy. So I was living in it at the time being. And my plan originally was to live in the basement and rent out the top unit or rent out the whole unit and then go stay with my grandmother when it was rented out. Because I thought in my head, I was like, this place is going to be like 50% occupied. I can live here part-time, all my personal belongings and things like that. I've lived out of a suitcase for years before. I was in college, so kind of used to it. And I was like, cool, that's what I'll do. But the place was like booked solid 100% for the first 4 months. And then I had like one vacancy. And so that idea quickly shifted. And I was like, this thing is printing money. I ended up moving in with my grandmother. So I was living rent free with her and I was operating this as a short-term rental. And so, the duplexing out idea, it was good. I added equity into the home and it can function as a, house hack where I rent out 2 separate spaces down the line if I ever decide to turn it into a long-term rental. But I just rolled with it and ended up listing the entire thing as its own singular Airbnb.
So now all 5 bedrooms and the 2 bathrooms are listed in one unit?
Exactly.
Do you still have that short-term rental? Is it still operating as a short-term rental now?
Yeah, it's still operating as a short-term rental. I've had it since 2022, early 2022.
How was your revenue numbers last year? Did they exceed what you were hoping for? Where did that kind of fall in? Because I know obviously you were getting in right around the peak of, everybody's the Airbnb rise and short-term rental rise. But a lot of people say after that, in the past couple of years, their income has dropped off a cliff. So are you still seeing that in your area, or what are you kind of seeing through your numbers?
The broader Denver metro area it's a really solid market. We've got some of the highest ADRs in the country. People are coming in year round, whether it's national parks in the summer times, trails, things like that. In the winter times, it's, ski resorts and mountain activities as well. We've also got Red Rocks, a bunch of conferences out here. There's a bunch of nationally recognized hospital systems here in the state of Colorado. So we don't have an issue with seasonality really dropping off, and demand stayed pretty steady. Now, the one thing we have seen is there's been an influx of supply. And so to your question on revenues and gross revenues over the course of the past 3 years, from 2022, it ticked up in 2023. where I made about 96,000, I believe, in 2023. And then I just got my books back from my CPA. And in 2024, we took a dip and I think we clocked about 88,000. It's been a little bit tighter this past year, I'd say. And I think part of that is, just the industry developing. Yes, we've got more competition, but we've also got more sophisticated competition. People are using professional designers, high-end photographers, twilight photography, winter and summer photos to help, market the place depending on the seasonality. There's a big difference between like a part-time, I'll call them like hobbyists hosts, and like a professional host. The cat's out of the bag, right? People know that short-term rentals can print money. And so what I've seen is a lot more sophisticated hosts and investors have come in, and, it's really been one of those things where, in my estimation, it's like the industry life cycle theory, right? There's a huge growth phase and then it kind of tapers out and then it'll kind of decline, right? But really what it is it's a redistribution of the bookings where 20% of the hosts are going to do 80% of the business, and those 20% of the hosts are going to make even more money. The people who are just, hosting a little bit more unprofessionally on the side, recycling some of their old furniture and things like that, they're going to start seeing, I think, the initial pinch or squeeze of tougher competition.
I see the same thing on a lot of fronts, but I agree with you too. Like the more sophisticated host that can still make that push to get to the top can get to the top of the market. But I have two different sides of the question too, piggybacking off what you were saying. Because I still like the method you took to get into your first rental is something that not to get on a religious preach again, but I tell people I preach about, like, if you want to get into this space, you probably have to be a little creative and have some self-sacrifice that you do, where you're like, you might live in one side of a duplex and maybe you short-term rent out the other side. Do you think that is still a viable option for people that are just getting started today? And would you recommend that strategy for people that are maybe in the same, shoes you were a few years ago?
I think it totally depends, because I manage pricing for a few people that do that, right? And they make good money still. You got to look at your specific market, right? Because your mortgage payment being a function of whatever interest rates are and the purchase prices in any particular market will determine your monthly fixed costs, right? And then you need to juxtapose your monthly fixed costs over what your potential income can be. It won't work in every market. The nice thing about Denver is, we have higher purchase prices, but we also have a lot higher ADRs. And so if someone's duplexing out their home and they're renting out their basement, they could still make anywhere between $45,000 to $55,000 a year if they're furnishing it and operating it professionally. So it's hard to kind of silo these things into like black and white, because you got to do a lot of things right, and you have to take the right approaches, set up the right systems, have good cleaning teams and things like that. As the market becomes a little bit more saturated, a little bit more competitive, you need to start looking for competitive edges and things like that. I always talk about finding your competitive edge. For me, in my place in Aurora, I have a competitive edge because I've got a sub 3% interest rate. So even if, there's a huge oversupply of inventory and margins get cut, my margins are still going to be hefty. I'm over here crying about making $2,000 last month versus, $3,000, right? Because my margins got tight. But the person, and I've got a $2,600 mortgage payment, but the person that's buying today the same value home, $540,000, and they've got a $3,500 monthly payment, they're going to be operating on a lot tighter margins. And for them, it's going to have to be a question on whether or not it's worth the sacrifice or the investment. So whether that's, securing low interest rate debt, doing some form of creative financing, tapping into leverage in some other asset class that you have, or it's buying like a really cool, unique mountain property that just has intrinsic appeal relative to all the other supply or inventory of short-term rentals available in the market. Again, the sad truth of it is it has become more competitive. And so you really do need to identify properties that have, intrinsic value, right? And so there's like debt, there's like unique amenities and design and things like that. But there's also looking into particular markets that have, municipal regulations that govern short-term rentals. I just bought a place up in Bailey, Colorado, where occupancy is limited based off of septic size. This particular property, it's a 3,700 square foot gambreled roof A-frame. So it's got like really cool design. It's got good views. We're amenitizing it to the T's. It's going to have hot tub, barrel sauna, games, etc. But the coolest thing about this property is it has a 5-bedroom septic system. 98 out of 100 properties in Bailey are going to be capped out at either a 3 or 4-bedroom septic system. So when I was identifying this market and, deciding on whether or not I should buy, one of the things that I did was I went on Airbnb and I just went on the filters and I searched for homes that could sleep 10 guests. And in a market where there are, I think it's like 3,200 short-term rentals in the broader Park County area, there were only like 24 or so that could accommodate groups that size legally. And so for me, I was like, 7% interest buying this property. It's a cool place though. And it's got intrinsic, sticking power in that it's a larger home with a larger septic system that can cater to larger groups. For me, it was kind of like a no-brainer. I think you just have to start thinking about these things a little bit more strategically now if you want to have sticking power and stand out in, what is a pretty competitive market.
Very solid advice. And that's kind of what I was even leading into as we talked about, how difficult the market is and other things like that. But at this moment, you are still buying or still actively going after the right type of deals in short-term rentals. And you alluded to it talking about your new property. And that's something I wanted to kind of touch on. And it's a great point for people listening to this too, as well, about the bedroom count, because even AirDNA not long ago mentioned, like one of the leading factors in the most profitable homes across the US and people that are still being extremely successful are two things, really. The larger homes are still winning by far because hotels will not be able to compete with that. And then the unique experiences. And so if you can combine both of those, you've got a pretty good avalanche of success coming your way with that. What did you learn from some of your past mistakes going into this new one that you were like, I'm not making that again? I'm definitely obviously we'll still make a few mistakes. Nobody's perfect, but what did you learn from your first few endeavors with it going to this next one now that you're swinging much bigger for the fences with this one, it sounds like? What are you kind of seeing there?
For this particular property, first and foremost was identifying something that had a competitive edge. For this one, it was the location, the structure. It's a really cool, A-frame with exposed beams, good views on a nice secluded plot of land, and the septic size, right? And then from there, a lot of what I learned is like operational efficiency, right? It took me 3.5, I'll say 4 months to design my space. That's 4 months worth of mortgage payments that I'm making and 4 months worth of opportunity costs that I'm losing from potential bookings, right? For this one, I'm working with a designer. It's like the best investment you could make in your short-term rental. I did dozens of return trips to all these different vendors and stores that I was buying things from in an effort to get a good deal, in an effort to cohesively design my space. When you work with a designer from start to finish, they'll be able to design, order, and build and furnish your space within like 4 weeks. Not only that, but they'll be able to get trade discounts and things like that from a bunch of different retailers, depending on who you're working with, and actually end up saving you money. So for like this particular place, off the bat, I think our design fee was like $12,000. We were ordering tile for, all the bathrooms and the kitchen, which we're redoing. It's a big cosmetic upgrade. And I think we saved off the bat like $6,500 just in tile alone. Not to mention, like, we haven't even gotten to the furniture yet. It's going to get done a lot quicker. It's going to get done a lot better. It's going to get done a lot more cost effectively. I think for me, that was like, know your strengths, right? That was the biggest takeaway I had. And a lot of it too, for this particular project, it's a big renovation. So there's a lot of like operational GCing, learns that I picked up from small projects down the line. A lot of it was a lot more centered on the front end, just doing market research and, I actually identifying like, what property and what area is going to make me the most money. And that's what I do on a daily basis, right? And I manage pricing for 40 different people here in the Denver metro area. And so I've got like a front row seat in seeing like, okay, which areas are doing the best? In which areas, which particular property types are doing the best? In which particular property types, what amenities do they have that are really driving the most bookings and the highest ADRs? And so for me, it's kind of been like a subconsciously processing all that information that went into, ultimately making this specific purchase.
I'm doing the same thing. I've designed all my STRs before, and then I have my biggest project coming yet, and I've already fully fleshed out, like, I'm hiring a designer, doing the whole and because I learned the same thing. Like,
who are you working with on design?
I haven't picked anybody yet, so we need to chat probably and see if there's somebody that you recommend. I'm doing my due diligence right now, but I would love to chat about that. We can definitely see, because I know I have the same issue. Like, I've had to buy things 2 or 3 times over. I've had to, I didn't get the discounts that are out there for people that do this full time. And I learned the same thing you learned. And I thought, like I did a good job on the design. I thought of my first ones, but as things evolved, it was like, yeah, I see like why somebody else probably should have designed this for a myriad of reasons. But you don't learn that until you take your few base hits. And I think you made a good point where, you're learning all this and you're like, the renovation and things like you took on smaller projects before you were confident enough to take on something this big. And I had the same kind of path as well too. I really tried to start really small. So all the mistakes I made were minimized instead of, tackling some massive project and then making every mistake there. And you alluded to your pricing strategy, and one of your biggest strengths. And one reason I was really drawn to talk to you even further too, is because you had some amazing insight into pricing strategies and things that people typically, when they hear pricing tools or dynamic pricing, if they're even aware of it. I have a person that I was working with not long ago, and I mentioned dynamic pricing. He goes, "Oh yeah, like, the Airbnb pricing thing." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I know you're losing so much money." And then I've talked to people and I go, like Price Labs or Beyond Pricing or all the ones that are out there. And they'll go, "Yeah, I have Price Labs," and they just set it. And then that's the last time they look at it for 3 years, What are some of the things that you have seen in pricing strategy that is actionable for people like today or in the next few weeks to really start to pay attention where they can increase their, the revenue that they're bringing in with the same amount of occupancy that they had before? Because I think that's something that is being left on the table too frequently in our field.
What I'll say is once you take the time and you make the investment into your space, design, furniture, you buy it, you pick the right location, all that, then pricing really becomes the highest value lever that you can use to spend time on to drive excess profit at your property. And what's so interesting about this is, 9.5 out of 10 people use Price Labs. They set it and they forget it. That's actually a generous estimate. It's like 70% of people use dynamic pricing, but 30% just have flat rate. And of the 70% that use dynamic pricing, they can tell you the first thing about Price Labs. And so what I tell people too is like, Excel is an exceptionally strong tool. You can embed a lot of, Excel functionality into websites and things like that, and create all these cool intricate graphs and make these crazy financial pro formas and models and things like that. But most people know how to use like the sum equation, sum product if you're fancy. And Price Labs is the same way. These dynamic pricing softwares, they're exceptionally strong. And they've got a lot of functionality through the customizations that they offer and the widgets that they have. And so, first things first, if you're not using dynamic pricing, use dynamic pricing. It'll cost you $25 a month.
Pays for itself before you even think about it almost every time.
Oh, totally. You'll get a 2,000% return on your investment the year, right? And it'll take some of the stress out of your plate. But the next thing there too is just like really familiarize yourself with the product. And there's some really cool, intricate like portfolio analysis and dashboard reporting features in Price Labs or, Beyond Pricing, Real House Pricing that you can familiarize yourself with. So get smart with the tool. You also need to, my approach to pricing, it's kind of threefold, 3 different levers. The first lever is Price Labs. All the properties that I manage pricing for, whether or not someone was using Price Labs before or weren't, I onboard them onto my Price Labs account. And it's a lot more proactive of an approach. Every week, once or twice a week, depending on volume and booking frequency, I'm going in and I'm making minute small adjustments on some of the customizations, as well as the minimum, maximum, and base price for any particular property. From Price Labs, I'm doing that on a weekly cadence. From there, I'm adjusting markup rates on the channel manager. If people have a multi-marketing channel approach where they're advertising on VRBO, Airbnb, they've got a direct booking website, these different channels have different, service fees that they charge the hosts versus what they charge the guests. So, one thing that's important for me is I want to make sure whether I'm getting a booking on Airbnb, VRBO, a direct booking website, or booking.com, whatever it is, I want to make sure that my payout's the same. So I'm not letting money fall through the cracks on any particular channel. Sophisticated travelers will go and check out each channel where your property is listed. And then third thing, and this really applies, I'll say to the markets here in Denver, we're getting anywhere between 100% to 70% of bookings on Airbnb. right? So I really optimize my specific pricing methodology for Airbnb specifically, because the third lever that I'm adjusting is on the Airbnb multi-calendar under professional hosting tools. You can unlock the multi-calendar, and I'm utilizing rule sets. There are specific pricing rules that you can tag on to specific days in your calendar that will trigger premiums or discounts based off of specific booking criteria that guests are making. I'm tackling price on these three different planes, essentially. Now, for the everyday host, the person who's working, a job, maybe they're working two jobs and they've got this side hustle, this short-term rental on the back burner over here, familiarize yourself with price labs. That's where you're going to get the highest bang for your buck leverage on your time, and learn it well. And don't do a set it and forget it. Don't do a seasonal approach where you're just going in, summer and winter time and making some small changes. Go in on a weekly basis, right? I mean, seriously, put it on your calendar, 20 minutes every Sunday afternoon. Go in, see what your booking activity's been like. If in a given week, let's say you get 4 bookings and those bookings accounted for 28 days. Well, maybe your prices are a little bit too low and you actually need to raise them because you're booking at 4 times the daily rate, essentially. A healthy booking cadence should, if you're aiming for like 100% occupancy, it might be like 1 booking per day per property, right? Or 1 night per day per property. The next thing I'd say too is do a little bit of research on the front end for your listing, because with short-term rentals, like if you have a specific niche product or property that no one else has, and you've got travelers that are reliant on your amenities or your location or your design type or whatever it is, if you have what they're looking for, if you're the only buy box, you're the only supply, people are going to have to pay what you're charging. I do a lot of research directly on the Airbnb app, and it's remarkable. Like, you will find the selection of amenities or the combination of amenities that you could offer at your short-term rental when people are going into Airbnb and making a search and they're selecting hot tub, I want an EV charger, and I want a cabin, right? You're the only person that fills all those boxes. And so if you're charging $500 a night and all the sub-market competitors in your area that are similar, but they don't have the hot tub or the EV charger are charging $300 a night, you're instantly commanding a premium. So it's about doing research on the front end too, to identify what amenities or combinations of amenities can I include in my listing that will just give me a competitive edge and allow me to charge more. Another thing that I really like to advise people on is like pets. One of the distinguishing features of Airbnb that completely, changes it from like a hotel is, homes will have fenced in backyards and people travel with their pets. Now I'm seeing this change in Denver, but 2 years ago, if I went in and I searched for a home that slept 10 guests in Aurora and I put in, 10 guests, 10 guest search, there might be like 300 properties that would pop up. And then if you click the pet button, it would go down to like 65. And, the odds are like, if you're a big group, you've got 2 or 3 families, someone's got a pet.
At least one.
Yeah, just one. You want to make sure that you're showing up in search, because if you're not showing up in search, you don't even give yourself the chance to get booked. Even if you were charging, a crazy high rate, at least you get, some exposure in search and get the option to get booked. So you want to make sure you're showing up as many searches as possible. And the big thing with pets, I'll say, for example, is like if you don't want to allow a pet, right, then allow pets on your listing, but charge $500 a night. Because still, you're boosting your SEO and search, right? You're showing up in more search results. You're getting more clicks. You've got a higher click-through rate. Maybe your conversion rate goes down because you're getting more views, but fewer people are booking because your price is higher because you got a $500 pet fee. But in a pinch, if someone loves your property and they've got, a small little chihuahua that's not going to cause any harm, they'll pay you $500 nightly rate and you'll be pretty happy about it. Another component on that is minimum lengths of stay. This is a big one because if you go into Airbnb, you've got a few different tools that you can administer a search with. You can do, a weekend search, you can do a week-long search, and you can do I'm flexible. Or you can go in and you can put in your specific nights. A lot of people I find when they go into Airbnb and they're making a search, they're going in and saying a weekend because they're coming to Denver for a Red Rock show. They're coming to Denver for a conference. They're here just to go ski for 2 days, right? And if someone does just a weekend search, and we'll call it like a lazy search, right? Someone's doing a lazy weekend search. That's only going to pull in properties that have a 2-night minimum stay over a weekend. Of the 70% of people who use Price Labs, I'd say like 60 or 70% of them are putting a 3-night minimum on their weekends.
I see it all the time.
It's like it's a plague.
Earlier, I had to tell someone, he asked me to review his listing, and it's funny, all the things you're saying are exactly what I told him. Or a few of them it's like, you have a 3-night minimum. I was like, most people in the U.S. in particular are searching 2 nights on Friday. You're not even going to show up. And I said the same thing about a pet friendly thing. I said, if you're not pet friendly, like, have a really high pet fee and make the money and become more. That's the most popular Airbnb filter, So I can agree with all that for sure. That makes a lot of sense.
And these like totally translate too. And people will say, well, like, okay, I don't want to get just a Friday and Saturday booking because then it's going to be much harder to get, my Thursday, my Sunday, my Wednesday booked. Totally makes sense. Now, there are a few things you could do with that, though. I mean, Price Labs, for example, has a customization where you can do day of week pricing adjustments. You can go in and you can specifically say, okay, I want to increase my weekend price by 20%, right? So if someone books just that, Friday, Saturday, they're going to pay an additional 20%. And then you've got a 20%, margin that you can then discount your other dates by to fill up those dates, right? Or what you can do, and I do a combination of these depending on the property, is you can utilize rule sets. And it's this idea of like using your weekends to sell your weekdays. And so what I'll do, for example, is like, I'll go in, I'll allow 2-night minimums for any size property, and I'll increase like high in demand dates by like 50%, right? So for example's sake, we'll say you've got a Friday and Saturday, we're charging $100 a night. I'm going to go in with the rule set and increase those prices by 50%. So they're showing up as $150. Now, highly unlikely anyone's going to book those days, but if they want to, they've got the option. But then what I'll do is I'll have a specific length of stay discount in there that says, okay, on that Friday and Saturday, if someone books these days and they book a 3-day long stay, I'm going to discount this by, 15%, just the Friday and Saturday. So that $150 nightly stay is going to get discounted by 15%. If someone books a 5-day stay, which is what I want to encourage, I'll discount the price by 33%, right? So that $150 number comes down to $100, and now it's right in line with where I want it to be. And you can utilize these rule sets to show up more competitively in search for specific booking length stay durations. And this becomes a lot more important specifically when your calendar starts to get filled in, because it's kind of like a game of Tetris. You got 7 bookings and you've got some orphan gaps. You got a 3-day stay here. You got a 1-day stay there. How do you get those booked? Whether or not you get booked is a simple function of how many times am I showing up in search and what's my conversion rate. If you got a bunch of calendar days already booked, you're not showing up in a lot of the lengthier stays. The number of views that your listing is getting is going down, then you need to increase your conversion rate. And you increase your conversion rate by putting in those rule sets. So if someone makes a specific search for those specific dates that you need to get booked, then you can discount them.
That is very valuable advice for people that are listening out there, because I think that is, it's kind of a song and dance when you're trying to show up more. And we could go on for hours of the different rule sets and strategies and how to really implement these things. But I think this is a good opening for people that are now, I'm sure their gears are turning, people listening to this thinking like, all right, now I see where the opportunities actually lie for me and where I can, increase my revenue with the same amount of occupancy I've had before, which is, increase your occupancy is obviously amazing, but hopefully we're already at the top of the market. And now we're trying to think of what are the extra things we can do to increase the revenue without spending more on the expense side. So I'm sure you'll have a ton of questions. People will want to talk a little further about this. Where can people find you at, and where could they connect with you if they did want to talk further about pricing and some of your experience?
Like I said, I'm a real estate agent here in the Denver metro area. I specifically help people find multifamily properties. That was a background of mine as well. I did multifamily underwriting, but more importantly, I help people identify and set up and operate some of the most successful short-term rentals here in the state of Colorado. And the brokerage that I work with, Good Neighbor Realty, we're a brokerage that specializes in working with investors, identifying, real estate opportunities that help drive generational wealth. So if anyone's here in the Denver area and they want to reach out and talk real estate pricing or short-term rentals or just general real estate in general, the best way to get a hold of me is probably through my Instagram. It's, just my personal Instagram, Michael McClearn, no space, or you can check out our website, stayrate.io. And in there's a few questions you can put in your information, book a call. And I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about this stuff all day long. I work 12-hour days and it doesn't feel like work. So always open for good conversation.
Same here. This one could have went on for hours. We'll definitely have to come back and do a part 2. If people in the comments let us know that they want us to go really, really in depth on the pricing strategies, then maybe we'll bring Michael back for a part 2. But I appreciate you for jumping on today. Some super insightful knowledge for people and very actionable things from somebody that has, made self-sacrifices and came through some of the storms and went through the good times and the bad times. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be encouraged to hear your story. We'll link his information in the show notes below. And if anybody has any questions for Michael or myself that we want to cover on the next one, feel free to let us know. And we appreciate y'all checking out another episode of Bigger Stays.